publications. He's written numerous articles and also two books, including Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation, 5, and The General Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, which of course we will discuss during today's program. You'll also have the opportunity for those of you in person to purchase that book and have him sign it. Please, without further ado, join me in welcoming Miko Peled. And I know you said I was supposed to say something about my own book. I was telling our audience that when I first went to Israel and Palestine back in 1986, I got to visit a Jewish family and a Palestinian family. And that story led to a lifetime of trying to make a difference on the ground and has culminated in my book, Crossing Borders, The Search for Dignity in Palestine, which just won a grand prize for nonfiction from the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. So I'm as dedicated, I think, as Miko in trying to make a difference on the ground, and so honored to be part of today's conversation with all of you. Welcome, Miko.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. I think the distinguished guests are all sitting over here as opposed to over here. So thank you for that. I would make two little additions and maybe one little correction to the introduction. I was born and raised in Palestine. So that's one. The second one is that the capacity that I fulfill right now is that I'm the founder and president of a new organization, the Palestine House of Freedom in Washington, D.C. In Arabic, we call it Dar al-Hurriya. And so we're dedicated to educating people about the need to dismantle the apartheid regime and create a real free Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights. And so, which are really the two main aspects of achieving peace in Palestine. So that's the role that I now hold mostly, and in that capacity, I'm speaking to you today. And I want to thank Faisal. We've been friends for a while now, and this is my first time in this magnificent museum. So thank you for inviting me and for hosting this and for having this wonderful museum here. It's really beautiful.
Thank you for being with us, yeah. And thank you to the people who are with us today here in Woodbridge, Connecticut, as well as the over 200 people on Zoom so far. Miko, to begin with, could you share with us just a brief idea about the journey that you went through from being an Israeli Zionist to being an advocate for Palestinian rights?
Sure. Okay, so again, thank you all for being here. And I see so many old friends. It's really nice. Thank you all for coming. Like I said, the distinguished guests are sitting in the chairs over there. I'm just here to answer a few questions. And when I give presentations, especially since October 7th of last year, there are two ways to start the conversation. One is the way Faisal chose to start, which is the journey and how I got to where I am. The other one is to start straight away with what's going on right now. So both are good. And what I said earlier is really kind of the end of the journey in a way, or the result of the journey, I should say, not the end. And that is the realization that I was born and raised in Palestine. And it's important to emphasize that because I think this duality in the name of the country I think it's misleading and it's misguided. The country has been called Palestine going back, since time immemorial. In fact, Faisal has a globe here that still has the name Palestine,
1930.
1930. And so I think it's important to be accurate historically. The name of the country is Palestine. The fact that a group of settlers, mind you, very organized settlers, came, stole the country and changed the name, I don't think that should be given legitimacy. And when we use their name, then we're giving legitimacy to what they did. And so that's why I always make sure to clarify that. And if you've seen my book, if you're familiar with my book, the book is titled The General Son. And the subtitle is Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. And so the General Son, it refers to the background that I had, the very Zionist patriotic Israeli background that I come from. So not only was my father a general in the Israeli army, but he was of that generation of generals that Israelis adore. They're like the gods of the Olympus. They were young officers in 1948. They gave us the Israelis, us the Jewish people, however they frame it, independence and a state and so on. And then in 1967, that generation of brave officers were generals, and they led the Israeli army into what is considered, again, wrongly considered, I believe, a glorious victory of 1967. Not only was that part of my upbringing, but there were other members of my family who were instrumental in the founding of the State of Israel, and then the operating of the apartheid states from 1948, which is when it was established, all the way, for many decades. So at every dinner table, at every family gathering, that was the conversation. Zionism, the Jewish state, Zionism, the Jewish state, completely ignoring the fact, of course, that this was a deeply violent apartheid regime, pretending that this was some kind of an enlightened democracy. But of course, when you're born and raised that way, and you read about your father and other family members in textbooks in school, and you hear about it, everywhere you go, then there's a great sense of pride. And then, of course, the big question is always, so how did somebody who comes from that background, and I was very proud of that background. And if you read The General Son, you'll see the first few chapters, that pride is expressed very clearly, which I know is very difficult for Palestinians to read. So how do you go from that to this? So there's two parts to the answer. The first one is that, sadly, we as humans change our perspective about the world and change our thinking, deeply thinking, our real belief system. We change it usually as a result of something that shakes us. Sadly, it's usually a tragedy that shakes us to a point where we have to re-examine everything we believe, we have to re-examine everything we've been told, and then we reach new conclusions, and then we're moved to take another path. And so in my case, as I think many of you know, in September of 1997, my sister lost her daughter in a suicide attack in Jerusalem. And that's precisely the kind of tragedy that forces us to rethink everything we know and everything we believe. And that was my case. And violence in Palestine did not start on that day, obviously. But for me personally, and for people involved in my family, that was obviously a crucial moment, a pivotal moment. And what we tend to do is we tend to talk about violence in Palestine, and we just kind of list the attacks and list the victims and list the different dates and times and operations and whatever they wanted to call them, just as a list. And what I try to do is say, well, we shouldn't do that, because every single instance needs to be examined. And so once again, going back to my situation, looking closely at what happened on that day, on September 4, 1997, 3 young men took their own lives and took the lives of others at the same time. And to me, that is worth, we need to pause for a moment and let that sink in, just how horrible that is. And the question that has to be asked, and it is not enough, is what happened? What kind of a reality, what kind of an environment was created where these young men would do such a thing, where people would do such a thing? And the answer is, of course, the apartheid state, this violent regime that had taken over Palestine many decades before that happened in 1948, and has led to the point where this kind of violence takes place, where people do things like this. And it's very important, I think, to pause and let that sink in. And of course, there have been so many deaths since then. and so many horror stories since then that we kind of tend to just gloss over. But I think it's important to take that in. And then I embarked on a journey, which again, the subtitle of the book, A Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, as an Israeli embarking into Palestine, the countries, if you've been there, how many people have been to Palestine? Oh, a lot of people. How many people, by the way, are from Palestine? Yeah. So almost everybody in this room is familiar with it. It's a very segregated place. So when you grow up, so the place that I grew up in, the country is Palestine, but I grew up in a very segregated colony within Palestine, in a bubble, in which Palestinians really don't exist. They come in and out of the frame from time to time, but there's no reason to engage in them or know anything about them, and we don't know anything about them, and we don't learn anything about them, and their very existence is negated, is denied. Not only is their existence denied, but the horrific tragedy that was put upon them is denied. And that's how these colonies, that's how these spheres within Palestine, where people live supposedly a normal life, where there's always paved roads and green lawns and electricity and water as much as you need. Within this reality that was established in Palestine, where none of this, where people live an entirely different reality. And throughout this journey that I embarked on, of course, I met Palestinians, and that's the second part of the transformation. Meeting Palestinians, and I think this is true to many of us, many non-Palestinians, once you meet Palestinians, then everything changes. Once you engage with people in Palestine, the Palestinians, everything changes. And so that, again, that's precisely what happened with me. The first time I engaged in Palestinians was not even in Palestine. I was living in California, even though I was born and raised in Jerusalem. And they like to call Jerusalem a mixed city. It's not a mixed city. It's a segregated city, completely segregated city. And even as a child, I remember noticing that the Palestinians that I would see from time to time, they look different. They live a different life. Their neighborhood looks different. Their school, everything is different. And as a boy, of course, you don't know the word apartheid, but you realize that there's an enormous difference. And you know that you're segregated because you are segregated. There's no connection between the two sides. And then as the journey continued, at some point I reached, and of course many people reach this point where you have to make a choice. Because it turns out that this, robust education, Zionist education that I received, and all the stories and all the things that I heard from family members and so on, there was nothing heroic about them. They were part of horrific crime against an entire nation. So now, what does that mean? Where do I stand in all this? If I reject it, what happens to me as a person, my identity, and so on? And when I reached that intersection, it became clear to me that I had to pick a side. And the thing is with this issue, and this is why, again, it's so important to refer to the country as Palestine, not to hyphenate the name. You have to pick a side because one side is right and one side is wrong. It's not like the differences are nuanced or small detailed. One side supports apartheid, genocide, and a ruthless campaign of ethnic cleansing. The other side are on the receiving end of these crimes. These horrific crimes that are all crimes against humanity are being perpetrated against these people, against the Palestinians. And I purposely not use the word victims because I don't think Palestinians are victims. Palestinians are heroic. But these crimes have been perpetrated against them. So there was no way for me to continue to my life, my work, without rejecting the crimes and the source of the crimes. And the source of the crimes are this movement that's called the Zionist movement, and this apartheid regime that stole Palestine, changed its name, and established itself so violently within Palestine. And then from that point on, the journey continued, and I began speaking more and meeting Palestinians more, engaging more, and so on, all the way to the point where over the last couple of years, I've been thinking about living in Washington, D.C., and seeing there's no Palestinian flag in Washington, D.C. And there's no official building. And it's just, you see, in Washington, D.C., you've got embassies, you've got so many flags, you've got so many organizations and representing other countries, and Palestine does not exist. Even the organizations that are Palestinians are usually, they'll use an acronym, or they're in Virginia somewhere, or there's never a flag. There's never the name Palestine. So in talking to many Palestinian friends, both in Palestine and in other countries and in the United States, of course, we came to this realization that the symbolism of an existing high-profile space in Washington, D.C., with the name Palestine, with a Palestinian flag, is crucial. Because if we don't exist there, we don't exist. If Palestine doesn't exist there, it doesn't exist. And so that's really the short version of the journey of how I ended up, coming from where I did and speaking the way I do and doing the work that I do today.
Thank you. I guess the next step in this conversation is I would like you to briefly, let's say 10 minutes, to give us an overview of what you see as your vision for what should happen in Palestine and how do we achieve peace.
Okay.
If that's something that everybody wants to achieve.
Yeah. I noticed I have to shout out a good friend of mine that's tuned in, I guess, on Zoom from Palestine, Omar Obari, who was part of an incredibly important organization in Palestine called Zochrot. And Zochrot means remembering, and it's part of an organization that's dedicated to the remembering and the commemorating, and indeed the return to the hundreds and hundreds of towns and villages that were destroyed by the apartheid state in 1948 and since. So I just want to shout out to Omar and to Zochrot. But I think that for a very long time now, the word peace has become something that nobody wants to discuss. How could we possibly talk about peace when all this, well, the reality is just so horrifying and so depressing? But we have to. We have to. The thing is, there's this misguided perception that peace means peace with the apartheid state, between Palestinians and the apartheid state. Well, just in saying that, I see people nodding their heads. That's an impossibility. The apartheid state is the source of the violence. The apartheid state is the source of, and I'll say this, and I say this with intent, the genocide that the Palestinians have been undergoing, for almost 8 decades. So if we want, and I believe we should all aspire and do everything we possibly can to bring peace to Palestine, but we have to realize what that means. To bring peace to Palestine, there are 2 steps. And by the way, this is not my vision. This is a Palestinian vision going back decades. I'm just, I'm relatively a latecomer to this vision, but it's a Palestinian vision, which is to dismantle the apartheid state, just as was done in other places around the world where racists, dictatorial, fascist regimes were brought down, and to allow for a free democratic Palestine to emerge on all historic Palestine, between the river and the sea. And I have to say, people take issue with between the river and the sea, which is really, in my view, ridiculous, because Palestine exists between a river and the sea. none of us put it there. That's just the geographic, I spoke actually at an event in Albany, New York at a library. And as I said it, one of the administrators of the library walked towards me, and we were sitting like this, very similar to this, and said to me, "You can't say that. You can't say that." And I said, "You can't say what?" He said, "You can't say the river to the sea." I said, "But that's Palestine exists geographically, between the river and the sea." So, I mean, it's really, it's an absurd conversation. But that's where this democracy needs to be established, a free Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights. That is the only pathway to peace. That is the pathway to peace. And to that end, again, the Palestine House of Freedom is dedicated to educating people as to, first of all, the fact that that's the conversation that needs to take place. And that it's a hopeful, joyous vision, a free Palestine with equal rights, where people who live in historic Palestine of whatever religion they may have, whatever nationality, can live together in peace. Now, there's a new thing in Palestine now. Just like in South Africa, you have white Africans who are the children and grandchildren, descendants of settlers and colonizers, and are the result of a horrific apartheid state. In Palestine, we have Israelis. It's the same thing. We're the descendants of settlers. We are the result of the apartheid state, of the ethnic cleansing, and so on. But now that's the reality. There are Palestinians and there are Israelis. But that's different from accepting the regime and recognizing the regime. So once again, we have to embrace two things. Number one, that we have to get serious about dismantling the apartheid. We have to get serious about dismantling the apartheid state. A couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, Amnesty International came out with a very thorough report, detailing the crime of apartheid and the way the crime of apartheid is being perpetrated in Palestine since it was established, since 1948. So don't listen to me, read the report. Read the report. So if I or almost anybody else says, well, there need to be sanctions again, there need to be sanctions imposed on the people say, well, you must be anti-Semitic. Why would you support sanctions and boycotting against the only Jewish state in the world and so on and so forth? Well, it's not about that. It has nothing to do with that. Sanctions and divestment and so on are the way we deal with the crime of apartheid. It's the appropriate response to this crime, which, by the way, is designated as a crime against humanity. It's that horrifying. It's such a horrible crime. So what we've done with Palestine House of Freedom over the last few months is we put out on social media, and it's in our website, parts of the report, parts of the apartheid, the amnesty report. Just read it. It's very simple. It's very clear. It details how the crime of apartheid is perpetrated in different parts of Palestine against different parts of the population. So Israeli Jews live under the same civilian law and have the same rights, regardless of where they live in Palestine. In Jerusalem, in the Naqab, in the south, in the Galilee, in the West Bank, it doesn't matter where Israeli Jews live, they're civilians. And their lives are governed by civilian laws. Palestinian lives are governed by different sets of laws depending on where they live within Palestine. Even within the population of Palestinians that are citizens of the state, of the apartheid state, there are differences. So if they live in the south, in the Naqab, where mostly Palestinian Bedouin live, they live under the governance of an agency called the Agency for the Development of the Negev. They call it the Negev. They call it Naqab Negev. Other Palestinians who have citizenship live under different bureaucracies. The Palestinians in Jerusalem have their own set of laws that they have to deal with, and then you've got the West Bank, what's known as the West Bank. The West Bank, by the way, doesn't exist anymore. There's no such thing as the West Bank. They've named it Judea and Samaria, It's completely integrated into the rest of the country through highways and, I mean, shopping malls and, I mean, everything else. But the way they differentiate, the way they describe themselves is that around the cities and towns within, again, what used to be the West Bank, there's concentrations of alien population. Concentrations of an alien population. So there are about 3.5 million Palestinians living in ghettos, surrounded by cities and towns that were built exclusively for Israeli Jews. So this idea that there is a West Bank is an outdated idea, completely outdated. It was integrated into the rest of the country a long time ago. And then you've got the Gaza Strip. And again, we've gotten used to this idea that there's such a thing as the Gaza Strip, as though there's any legitimacy or any real, real reasoning to it. The Gaza Strip was created as a concentration camp. And as our friend Yusuf Al-Jamal says, this concentration camp has recently become a death camp. But the problem is the existence of the strip. Why is there a strip? Why is it segregated from the rest of the country? So the apartheid state created these divisions in order to basically keep everybody confused and apply privilege to Israeli Jews throughout the entire country while denying rights to Palestinians. But the bureaucracy is so complicated. So the apartheid report details all of that through research, through interviews, with data. It's an excellent report. And the proper response when this crime is being perpetrated is demanding sanctions, is demanding divestment, is demanding boycott. And by boycott, I don't just mean, not buying their hummus or not buying their avocados. By boycott, I mean they shouldn't be playing in FIFA. They shouldn't be participating in the Olympics. We need to get serious about this. They should not. We're talking about closing diplomatic missions, not allowing the representatives in any arena to be part of any event. I mean, that's what brought down the apartheid state in South Africa. And we have a model. We don't have to reinvent the wheel at all. There are plenty of models of how to do this. So we have to get serious about understanding what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with another Western democracy. We're not dealing with the only Jewish state and all that rhetoric. We're dealing with a brutal apartheid state that has been engaged in genocide. Now, don't take my word for this, for the genocide. Read the definition of the crime of genocide. Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish jurist, a Jewish lawyer, wrote this in 1948-49. It's very clear. It's very short and it's very clear. Take a look at the definition of the crime of genocide, and you will read a synopsis of what has been happening to Palestinians for the last almost 8 decades. And who is responsible for this crime of genocide, for this genocide? The apartheid state. If we don't end the apartheid state, we will not see an end to the genocide. Now, they stole a country. They destroyed large parts of it. They renamed it. They renamed localities within that country. They're in an ongoing process of destroying monuments and destroying history, denying the identity of the people who live there, denying the identity of the country, of the existence of the people. We have to understand what we're dealing with, and we have to make sure we're laser, our focus is laser sharp on bringing an end to that so that we can end the killing and the genocide, and we can begin talking about what a free Palestine looks like. Until we do that, we're not going to see an end to the suffering of Palestinians. Until we do that, we're not going to see the release of thousands upon thousands of Palestinian prisoners. Until we see that, we will not see a serious conversation about the right of the Palestinians to return. And there needs to be a serious, this is not a bumper sticker. Very often people talk about the right of the Palestinian refugees to return as though it's some kind of a slogan. It's not a slogan. There have to be measures put in place to allow for that to happen. There's not going to be peace in Palestine until the apartheid collapses, brought to its knees, and a real free Palestine, a real democratic Palestine with equal rights is established. That's base camp. And that is the pathway to peace. They present it as, well, we created this thing and you want to destroy it. No. They are engaged in destruction. They are engaged in denying what is happening to Palestinians. They're engaged in denying the existence, never mind the rights, but the existence of the Palestinian people. We're talking about replacing an apartheid regime with a democracy with equal rights, a free democratic Palestine with equal rights. So I think it's important also to negate, to step away from their premise and focus on a positive premise, which is, again, like I said earlier, is the pathway to peace, is the vision for peace. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Miko, I was wondering if you can educate us a bit about the structure of the Israelis themselves. How do you classify them in terms of their understanding of the true history of what happened, their attitude towards Palestinians, the future, etc.? Who are the Israelis with respect to these issues, and how do we get them to move to where you are?
So no easy questions today. Okay. You know, there's a great social media guy, Hamza Saadeh. Maybe some of the younger people here know him. Check out his conversations. He's online on YouTube, on Instagram Live a lot with just you know, Israelis, and you should hear some of the conversations. It's hair-raising. He's brilliant, and the people he talks to, he brings the truth out of them in ways that maybe they don't even know. You know, Israelis are a society that was born of a horrific crime. That's what Israeli society is. And so when you're born of a horrific crime, obviously you think that the crime is a great thing. And how you justify the crime, well, it has to do with your own personal perspective. Some people think that Palestinians don't exist. Some people think that maybe they exist, but they should be killed. Some people, whatever, you know. I mean, the range of the discourse in Israeli society, whether it's in the media, whether it's among politicians, whether it's within people, just day-to-day people, is absolutely horrifying. Is absolutely horrifying in its racism and its negation, again, not only of the rights of Palestinians, but the existence of Palestinians and the justification of this sadistic reality that has been part of the life in Gaza, in Gaza, or the Gaza Strip, over the, you know, since October 7th. The justification, the excuses, the way it's framed. And again, I think that's something that we need to be aware of. The way it's always framed is Israel's war with Hamas, the Israel-Hamas war. What does that even mean? What does that even mean, Israel-Hamas war? Israel has been at war. Israel declared war against the Palestinian people almost 8 decades ago and has been consistently massacring and displacing and destroying Palestinian lives for 8 decades. Israel's war with Hamas? This began with Hamas? What are they even talking about? But framing that way presents a possibility that somehow this is justified because, well, Hamas is a terrorist organization and Hamas is this and Hamas. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd. But that's how this discussion is that's how this the discourse is. That's a discourse that takes place there. And here, by the way, Every time you hear anybody talk about it in the news, wherever, in any conversation, that's the framing. Hamas is not the issue. It's never been the issue. The problem is not the resistance to the oppression. The problem is the oppression. The problem is the source of the violence, not the response to the violence. I've been saying this for a while now. I was raised learning about the partisans who fought fascism in Europe and all these great fighters who fought fascism in Spain and in Greece. And in my lifetime, many of our lifetimes, by the way, some people forget, but Spain, Portugal were fascist regimes. Greece was a military dictatorship. And of course, South Africa. But I mean, people forget. And, we learned, of course, the fight against apartheid in South Africa and the fight against dictatorships everywhere. We always, learned about the people the resistance against these regimes as heroes. I never ever heard having to condemn them or denounce them until it came to Palestine. When it comes to Palestine, the expectation is, first of all, you have to condemn them. Condemn them for what? What is it exactly we need to condemn them for? Standing up? Resisting? Demanding freedom? I thought we believed in these things. Where did it come from that we accept that there should be an exception for Palestinians? And people say this all the time. And many people agree with it. Almost every interview I've given a lot since October 7th, has to begin with, do you condemn? Are you out of your minds? Yeah, I condemn. I'll tell you who I can condemn. I condemn the apartheid state that has been engaged in a sadistic type of genocide for almost 8 decades. That's what I condemn. You want me to condemn the people that are subjected to these crimes when they stand up? And by the way, we talk about what happened on October 7th a lot, right? This is something that we talk about a lot. And it's a difficult conversation, but actually it's really quite simple. When we go to protest, as many of us do, one of the chances, we call for justice. And the following sentence is, if we don't get it, I'm sorry? Shut it down. Well, what did the Palestinian fighters from Gaza do? What did the Yemeni forces do? They shut it down. They shut it down. They completely paralyzed the apartheid state. They completely paralyzed. They're paying heavily. But they did exactly what we've been chanting for years. Shut it down. The apartheid state is in a state of chaos, and it has been since October 7th. And by the way, I don't think it's a coincidence. Some of us, again, are old enough to do the math, but October 7th was exactly 50 years and 1 day after the October 6th war began in 1973. Of course, the Egyptian and the Syrian armies were nowhere near as effective as the Palestinian fighters, who, by the way, came out of one of the poorest and most oppressed regions in the world, where this cup with water is a luxury. That's where they came from. And they managed to paralyze the entire apartheid apparatus. The military was paralyzed. The intelligence services were humiliated, still are. And then when the Yemeni forces began blocking Bab el-Mandab, which resulted in the port, they call it Eilat, the port at Rashrash, is bankrupt. It's done. It's closed. So they did exactly what is supposed to be done. So that needs to be condemned. So again, this is the kind of conversation that I think is important for us to, take control of the conversation and not be led by them. Now, again, going back to the question of Israeli society, that's how Israeli society presents it. How dare they? How dare they? How dare they? Well, what do you mean, how dare they? They're doing exactly what they should be doing. They're doing exactly what would be expected. And this time they're quite effective. They're paying a heavy price, but they're extremely effective. So the only way I think, I get asked this a lot, how do you get more Israelis to think like you? Well, first of all, I don't know. I don't know how is it that that not everybody thinks like me, because it makes so much sense to me on this particular issue. But I think racist societies have never given up their privilege willingly. I don't think that's ever happened. They need to be brought to their knees. And the way we do it is, again, through severe sanctions, through heavy divestment, and through boycotts. I'll tell one little story that I always like to tell. In the previous Olympics in Tokyo, there was an Algerian athlete by the name of Fathi Nourin, and he was a judo practitioner, and he made it to the Olympics. He was part of the Algerian team. Just think about how hard he must have worked to get to the point where he was in the Olympics, right? A young athlete. And some of you know I have a background in martial arts. When he was called to step on the mat and compete with a member of the apartheid state, of the team of the apartheid state, he said no. He said no. He was kicked out of the Olympics. He was kicked out of the International Judo Federation. He can no longer compete in judo anywhere. He gave up his career, which, is heroic. But that's not his responsibility. This young man should not have to give up his career. The Olympic Committee should not allow a team from the apartheid state to participate. It shouldn't be his responsibility to give up his career. We should have been there to make sure there's pressure on the Olympic Committee, and there's pressure now, by the way, on FIFA. We need to apply pressure so that the teams from the apartheid state are not permitted to participate. Or a suggestion, thank you. A suggestion that I've been making in regards to the FIFA, regarding to soccer, if they want to allow a team from the apartheid state to participate, they need to extend invitations to the thousands of young Palestinians who've had their legs amputated, and allow them to come watch the games. The voice of conscience, if you will. You know what I mean? Don't let them get away with it. You want to let them play? Fine. But bring these young heroes from Gaza, from everywhere else that have been targeted, and let them watch the game. It's Israeli society for you.
Thank you. Krista, I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask a couple of questions for Miko. And I'm going to add you to the spotlight here.
Okay.
Krista?
So, Miko, one thing we know is the power differential between Israel and its supporters on the one hand and Palestinians and their supporters on the other is so great. And yet we're seeing such outpouring of support and solidarity with Palestine. And also things like the ICJ rulings, the reports that you mentioned that have come out in the past years. Are we at a unique moment? And, is there some kind of golden opportunity or crossroads that we need to really push this moment forward that is somehow different than other challenges to an apartheid state?
Yes, of course. We're at this could be an opportunity if we seize it. This could be the beginning of the end if we seize the moment. It's up to us. The change is not going to come from, from the sky. It's not going to come from a candidate. It's not going to come from, no, it's going to come from us. This is it. We're it. If we seize this opportunity, if we take this enormous energy, this enormous call for justice that's out there in the streets, on campuses, just the heroic work done by students on campuses, and take it to where it needs to go, then yes, this is an opportunity that I don't know that we've seen before. But again, it's up to us if we take this opportunity or not. They're on a mission. The other side is on a mission. They're not going to stop. This whole conversation of whether or not there's going to be a ceasefire is ridiculous. Of course not. Why would they want to stop? Why would they stop? We need to seize this moment. And it's being seized in many ways. I mean, we're seeing, again, we're seeing in protests in the streets, we're seeing the heroic work of students and so on. We need to take that. And that's really what kind of the impetus for Palestine House of Freedom being in Washington, D.C., on Pennsylvania Avenue, just blocks away from the Capitol, to take this tremendous energy, this tremendous display of humanity that we're seeing in the streets and on campuses, and enter that into the places where decisions are being made so that they can no longer ignore us. We have to be in the room. We have to get in the room. And the common wisdom is, well, it's impossible because the other side has all the money and the other side has AIPAC and the other side is this. Yeah, they have all these things. So what? Other struggles succeeded. Other struggles that nobody thought could succeed, succeeded. You know, I can list many of them. Apartheid, of course, is one of them. The apartheid in South Africa is one of them, but there are many examples. We should not accept that this can't be done. We need to put everything we've got to end it, and to end it now. Not next generation, not all this talk about, you know, our lifetime there. No, now. It has to end now. How many more Palestinians have to die and suffer? And it's on our watch. It's on our watch as we sit here. And somebody wants to tell me that there are not enough people here that could put together, that figure out how to do this, how to get there. We have to do this now. So again, this is an opportunity which will, but what's going to make it an opportunity is whether we seize it or not, what we do with it. We have to do something with this, you know. And I just want to say one more word about the liberated zones on campuses. I visited several of them, and the display of humanity on those campuses was the most encouraging, optimistic, wonderful thing I've ever seen. You know, I don't know that, you know, this is unbelievable stuff. The way they operated, the way they ran these, and some of them were huge. Some of them had lasted for a very long time. And they figured it out. And when people from the other side came in to provoke, whatever, the way they were dealt with, in a disciplined, organized way. And what were they calling for? Which I think is extremely important. Across the board, they were calling for sanctions. They were demanding transparency from their campuses, from the universities, and sanctions, which means dismantling apartheid. That's the response to the apartheid. And they were calling for a free Palestine from the river to the sea. And they're being chastised even by people who are supposedly pro-justice and pro-peace in Palestine, that saying river to the sea is wrong and calling for this is wrong. Who the hell are we to tell them what to say, what not to say? They're smarter than we are, and they've done things that most of us will never do in our lifetime with these encampments on campuses. And the university administrators, criminals, one after the other almost, yes, are condemning them. And look at the pattern. Who are they condemning? Not the violent Zionists who came in to attack, but the students who are demanding freedom and justice. You know, it's the same pattern as with the fighter Palestinian resistance in Palestine. Who are we condemning? Who's being condemned officially? Not the perpetrators of the violence, but the Palestinians who are standing up for justice. It's the same pattern in both cases. We need to condemn those who display courage and their willingness to put their life on the line and demand justice and freedom. So again, that's if that is not a display of an opportunity, I don't know what is. The question is now, what do we do with it? And I know that many of these encampments, many of these students are planning for the fall, and they're planning to escalate. You know, at UCLA, my daughter just graduated UCLA. At UCLA, the chancellor and the entire administration of the university were at the chancellor's home, which was only 200 yards away from where UCLA students were being beaten up, brutally beaten up by the police and by Zionist gangs. And they were watching it live, and nobody stepped out to stop it. They were 200 yards away in the chancellor's house watching it because there's cameras everywhere. watching it live, and they didn't come out to stop it. They didn't come out to defend their students. Just think about this. So again, we need to be there to support them. We need to be there to demand, and we need to demand a seat at the table. We were at a meeting in DC with people from different organizations a few weeks ago, and there's a young man who used to work at a senator's office. And he described something which is stuck in my mind, and that is the vision. That's really what we need to, that's the point that we need to get to. He said that when the Zionist groups come, and there's lots of them, appointment, no appointment, confirmed, not confirmed, they clear the conference room and they bring the senator. No questions asked. When we show up, we're lucky if we see a staffer. That's where we need to go, from where we are today to that point there, where they clear the conference room and they bring the senator because we showed up. And that's the work that we need to do. And that's really the golden key. That's the thing, the question that we need to figure out. And that's one of our objectives with Palestine House of Freedom, is to get to the point where we figured out how to do that. That's really what all of us are trying to figure out right now, how to put together a strategy to do just that, to get in the room, to be relevant, to be in those places where decisions are being made.
I'll come back to you later on, Krista. But in the meantime, sure. Does anybody in the audience here have a question they'd like to pose? Yes. We'll start with Nadia.
I really appreciate you starting the Palestine House of Freedom, and I'm amazed at the effort in you being here. The 46,000 businesses approximately have closed in Israel, and that, so change does happen within human beings, within Israelis, within South Africans, within Americans, when you pinch the pocketbook. So it changes on a dime, like in a moment. Like people just are like, oh, I don't want to live here anymore. I think I'll leave. I think maybe I need to consider a different type of government. Maybe I need to change my idea because suddenly I don't have air conditioning, or suddenly I don't have, access to the things at the grocery store that I would want. So to me, we can cut off the tax money, and I think a lot of people in this room have been working for many, many years to do this. Cut off the tax money, our tax money, going to Israel. And in my district, I'm running for Congress. A very popular idea. People want to cut off the tax money, not because they think anything one way or another about Israel or Palestine, but because they are suffering themselves. And they don't feel we can afford to send money to a country that has subsidized housing and free healthcare for their citizens. They don't feel we can afford to do that. So as a person who has worked on aviation safety issues and gone from office to office, I want to know, and just with the groups of victims' families whose family died on a new airplane, we went from office to office to office and talked with, and Boeing was like, how are these people getting in there? Well, we got in there because we had the huge support of the American public and the mass of the population around the world who fly. They all fly, right? Everyone flies. So it's the same situation here. Everyone is suffering. Every community is suffering because our tax dollars, too many of our tax dollars are being sent abroad for whatever, and not being used here for our well-being. And so many people are in trouble. So we can organize people to do exactly what we did to get the Aviation Safety Act passed. And so I just want your comments about how the Palestine House of Freedom is maybe being engaged in that or not, or what you think about that kind of effort.
Can you summarize the question?
Yeah.
Well, to summarize the question, I would, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nadia, but to follow the model of of what you've done with aviation, with aviation safety, to build on the fact that Americans are tired of seeing their tax money being sent to other places, and not for good reasons, for supporting war and supporting apartheid. and then to use that for Palestine. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's precisely what you want to do. Absolutely. There's no question. That's precisely what you want to do. And that's precisely how we hope to get into those rooms. The thing that we need to do is we need to get, like you're saying, a lot of people fly, and of course people are afraid that something would go wrong. So we need to get to a place where people have a better understanding of what the problem is for them with sending money to Israel. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. This is exactly the approach that we should all be taking. Absolutely. Yeah.
Krista, do you have any questions from the audience there? Maybe one question that we can take? We're not hearing you. You must be muted.
Sorry, I was muted. I was just looking at the audience questions, trying to combine some of them. There's some questions about, the ways in which Israeli society is in denial, using the Holocaust as justification, and things like the Yinon plan, which of course calls for a greater Israel, that juxtapose against, things that you're proposing and many others about one democratic state. So how do you shift this discourse from two diametrically opposed ideas, so to speak? And I know we're talking about how to do that in a activist kind of way, but how do we really shift that conversation in a way that really do you just let Israelis kind of catch up to the conversation? How do they ultimately transform from their diehard support of the Zionist agenda, including Jews around the world, not just Israelis? How do we shift that in a way that gets us out of that stuck mode, what I would call stuck mode of where Israelis are today in terms of just burying themselves in this sea of victimhood from the historical trauma of persecution?
Well, I'll say a few things. First of all, Israelis have never been persecuted by anybody. The very few Israelis have had family members that had anything to do with the Holocaust. The vast majority of Holocaust survivors did not go to Palestine. And many of the ones who did go left because they couldn't stand it. So somehow Israelis being victims of anything other than their own, illusions and delusions is there's no real truth to that. After I remember speaking to South Africans, white, South Africans, telling me how white South Africans loved Nelson Mandela. They're all opposed to apartheid. And I remember hearing stories about how Germany after the war, nobody was a Nazi. And everybody opposed that. People forget, people change. When Palestine is free, there's a Palestinian prime minister. Israeli kids go to school with Palestinian children. Their principal and their teacher are Palestinians. They'll get, they're going to see the sky hasn't fallen. Their lives are going to be better, and we're going to move on. It's not a question of getting them to the point that they agree before we do this. When the reality shifts, they will shift with the reality, and they're going to live a better life. This, the free Palestine is going to be good for everyone. This is something that's going to benefit both sides. What we're seeing now is a reality that only one side, and I don't even know that they benefit, but one side certainly has privilege. What we're talking about is a reality where both sides benefit from a better reality, a just reality. So they'll come along, and if they don't, then they don't. But eventually, I think they will. I think we've seen, again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've seen what they did in South Africa. We've seen what they did in other places. I was just thinking of two things I wanted to bring up, not related to your question, but this came to my mind. First one is, you're talking about Israeli society, and there were some incredibly courageous Germans during World War II who stood up to the Nazis and were executed and were sent to concentration camps. Doctors and others. There were movements. There were people. There was, they were persecuted and they were killed. But there was an anti-Nazi resistance. In South Africa, there were many white South Africans who stood with the ANC. There was Joe Slovo and Ruth First and Albie Sachs, and people who paid. Ruth First was assassinated. They paid a heavy price, and they were there, and they held significant roles within the resistance to apartheid. You don't hear that any kind of anti-Zionist movement in Israeli society. It doesn't exist. If tomorrow morning 50,000 Israelis stood up and marched against the existence of the Gaza Strip, or against, whatever it is now, 20,000 or so political prisoners, nobody would be shot. Maybe a few people would be arrested, but there's really very little risk. Where are they? Where are they? So I think that's telling. That's telling of where Israeli society is. So that's one thing. And then I wanted to say one more thing about the genocide. The way Faisal and I met is at the Palestine House of Freedom. We're working on implementing an idea that's been floating around for a long time by, a man who's been a hero for many of us, Ralph Nader, which is to open a genocide museum, a Palestinian genocide museum. And to commemorate the Palestinian genocide in a space. And so we have room, not a lot, but we do have room for that. And that's what we've been talking about and working on for the last few months, is using some of the space we have at the Palestine House of Freedom for a Palestine genocide museum. So I just wanted to make sure to say that.
A question back there. And please just make it a question. Yeah.
Miko, thank you so much for your comments today. I was wondering if you could comment on some of the concrete campaigns that we could engage in, try to build this movement to bring an end to the apartheid system. And just to reflect, we've done it in this state before. We built the campaign to help end South Africa apartheid. Connecticut was one of only 3 states that divested from its investment funds, and we should be calling on the state of Connecticut to divest from its portfolio from Israeli companies that are invested in our portfolios. We shouldn't be invested in apartheid. We shouldn't be investing in genocide, and that's what we're doing. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that. Just one other thing, I'm sorry, but I got to point this out. There's very few politicians these days that are raising the issue of genocide and what's happening in Gaza. Nadia is one of them, right? We should support her. Justin is here from the Green Party, and he has petitions that he is circulating to try to get the Green Party on the ballot in Connecticut. And if anybody's a registered voter in Connecticut, please see Justin and sign his petition today. We need to get the Green Party on the ballot in Connecticut.
Yeah, Justin is going to be at the door, the exit door. When you're coming out, you could stop there if you want and sign the petition for him. Thank you. Do you remember what the question was?
Yeah. So I've known John for many years, and I remember years ago we spoke, and he told me about the campaign to get the state of Connecticut to divest from apartheid in South Africa, from the apartheid state of South Africa, and that never left me. And how difficult it was, because there's a sense people like to say, well, this is, that was different, this is different, that was not as hard as this. Well, talk to John or some of the other activists who were involved in that, and that was not the case. And so the first thing we need to do, or we believe we need to do, is to educate, because right now there are several problems. First of all, Americans are Zionists. Americans receive a Zionist education. They receive a Zionist education. And you can take a sample, go out in the street, go into a store. When I talk to people, people say, where are you from? I say, I'm from Palestine. And they'll say, what? Pakistan? And when I tell that story, everybody's had a similar experience where people say, Pakistan? No, not Pakistan. And they're like confused. And I'll say, have you heard of Israel? They go, oh, Israel, of course, we love Israel. So that's the reality. That's the reality we live in. So now, with that context, if we go up to someone and say, you need to divest because it's an apartheid state, well, you must be anti-Semitic. You want to impose boycotts? You want to sanction the only Jewish state and so on. So we've got to elevate. So what we've done is the first campaign out the gate was putting out parts of the Amnesty report on apartheid. We put it on our social media. We got pretty good engagement for for a social media page that just got started. We put on our website, and we got people who need to understand. We're not saying it's apartheid because we just woke up one morning and decided that's what it was. There's a report by Amnesty International. So read the report. Now, the next thing is to get groups and organizations to adopt the report. So this is going along the lines of the other side when they reframed the definition of anti-Semitism.
Right.
So now everybody's confused about what anti-Semitism is. It used to be very clear. Now there's confusion, and I think that was done by design. The definition is called the working definition. It's not really clear what it says. I mean, it's confusing. So, but one thing we do know, we shouldn't say anything about this issue because we might be labeled as anti-Semitic, and that's precisely the purpose. And they did a fantastic job in getting this definition adopted everywhere. Well, we need to we start with our friends and then go beyond that, but we need to get the churches and the organizations and the peace groups and so on to adopt the apartheid report. When we adopt the report, we engage in a conversation. Now we're talking about apartheid and we're educating our members, our friends, and so on, our fellow congregants, whatever the case may be. And like I said earlier, the report comes with recommendations. So we're adopting the recommendations. Now, it's not somebody saying you should boycott. It's in the recommendation of Amnesty International because this is how you respond when the crime of apartheid is being perpetrated. So when people go home today, you go to whatever groups you're part of, religious faith groups or civil groups or whatever, start the conversation, talk to board members, talk to the people, leadership within these groups, and get people to start adopting the report, start a campaign to adopt the report. And we're going to put out more information about that so people have more specifics. But it's many people here have been engaged in campaigns already, so I'm sure you know how to go about it. But it's really, really important. And so these are two things that I think will elevate the conversation until people realize and really internalize the fact that we're talking about a particularly sadistic form of an apartheid regime. And therefore, we need to engage in all these other actions. We're not going to get anywhere. So I would really invite everybody to get involved in that. And if you want, our website and, like I said, our social media pages, we're using the Arabic name, which is Dar al-Hurriya. And I don't know if we have a paper here with the QR code that when we do the book signings, I'm happy to, you guys can just go on do the QR code, and it'll take you straight to that campaign. And then get involved in that, push that around. This is very easy. It's very clear. The report is well written, and I think it's a really good starting point. And again, we're just getting started here.
Yeah, I think we're going to kind of wrap this conversation. Is that okay? And we want to give people an opportunity to have their book signed. If you need to purchase the book first, of course, before you can sign it. Because you don't want you signing books and leaving them behind. With your name on it, we won't be able to sell them to other people. So,
Faisal,
yes.
Maybe just one more follow-up question before you close out, given some recent news bulletins.
We'll give you one follow-up question. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we know that administrations in the U.S. haven't changed much in terms of policy in the Middle East, and not much has changed in decades. And education, of course, is key, as you said, to changing what's happening now. But in the meantime, how do we protect Palestinians on the ground? This is partly from the audience asking about things like settler violence. And Biden apparently has dropped out of the race. And if you could just say a little bit about U.S. elections off the top of your head, how that may impact the situation on the ground moving forward.
Your grandchildren are going to ask you someday, where were you when you heard that Biden dropped out of the race?
We were on this call. Here we are. And I did put the Palestine House of Freedom in the chat for those of you who are on Zoom. Look it up.
Wow. I imagine him literally just dropping, like literally just falling. Wow. That's a bit of history we all just experienced.
Yeah.
You know, the question of defending Palestinians in particular, in general, and Palestinian activists is something that, I've been talking about for a very long time. I have many close friends who are activists throughout all of Palestine. And every morning I wake up dreading to hear that they were shot. The kids are not orphans, because it's a real possibility. I mean, we've got Sheena Blockley here. We've got the one over there. I mean, the story, it's shocking. I mean, Sheena Blockley was assassinated, it seems like ages ago, and nobody, it's over. And not to mention, day-to-day Palestinians. There's no way that we could possibly defend Palestinians unless we demand an end to the apartheid state. And it's not only, as some of you I'm sure know, Isa Amro is from Hebron. There was an assassination attempt against him by Palestinians. And the Palestinian Authority, it's been over a month, they haven't even investigated. The guys didn't have masks or anything. It was caught on video. So Bassem Tamimi was just released after 8 months of horrific torture. He couldn't walk. He told me he had to relearn how to walk because for 8 months he didn't step out of the cell because they don't go outside. And there's 11 guys in a small cell. No food. I mean, horrific conditions. It's horrifying. And how do we defend them? Well, we can't defend them unless we stand up and demand the collapse of the apartheid state that's creating this environment. And if Isa or Bassem or any one of these people gets shot, it'll be on social media for a few weeks, and we're all going to cry, and then we're going to move on, because that's what happens when Palestinians are killed. It stays on social media for a little bit, and then it's over. And there is nobody. It's not even part of the conversation. Guaranteeing the safety and security of Palestinians is not even part of the conversation. Palestinian friends of mine whose children are now for years have been incarcerated in these dungeons. And when they come out, they're sick, 22-year-olds, horrible diseases, incapable of regaining their lives, not to mention being shot. We have to make these demands.
Who is this?
And again, there's no way that guaranteeing the safety and security of Palestinians is not part of the conversation anywhere. And unless we force it forward, and there's only one way to do it, unless there's a collapse of the apartheid state, there's no way to guarantee the safety and security of Palestinians because they're in charge of everything. They can come in, they can shoot somebody, and that's going to be the end of it. And so that's a big part of what this conversation is about. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple.
Do you mind if I just follow up? And thank you so much. Your bravery has been so encouraging throughout these years. But a way of dismantling this apartheid state, we realize that this, as you said before, this is part of the U.S. Israel, I see, is our military system. It's just an outpost for the U.S. military over there.
That's right.
And what we need to do is focus on our Congress to stop sending them billions of dollars and our armament. So this is a way, instead of saying we have to dismantle them over there, we have to dismantle that within ourselves here in the United States. So that's what I talk when I lobby. I'm talking to my congressman about stopping our industry here that's over there. And the other, if you can mention something about Iran, because they are pushing, Israel's pushing so badly about Iran as being behind, Hamas and all that stuff. So just maybe a word about your thoughts on Iran and our own military state here. Just one minute, sorry.
You want to throw Sudan into it?
That was the scene.
Throw in all the bad guys. All the bad guys. Well, they're not the bad guys.
Yeah.
They're not the bad guys.
No.
So I don't think there's any secret that Iran supports the Palestinians. So
yes.
I don't think that's big news. I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting the Palestinians. Right. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But of course, pegging Iran as some kind of a devil, that's been part of it. By the way, that's been part of Israeli strategy going back decades.
Yes.
It's nothing new.
No.
You know, every time there's a crime perpetrated in Gaza, they go, "Oh, look over there, Iran," and everybody looks that way.
Yeah.
Everybody looks that way.
Yes.
They show up in the UN, or they show up wherever they show up with their spokespeople, and they've got all these ridiculous accusations, and the whole world just goes looking the other way, while the crimes, American-made weapons and American-made ammunition is used to massacre civilians. I don't think anybody in this room disagrees with what you said, so I don't really think there's anything to add to that. That was really well said. I appreciate that.
And Miko, from the audience, how do you expect Palestinians who have suffered the horrific acts that we've witnessed, lost family members, been dismembered, lost their homes, their lives, their livelihood, to live in the future in peace with Israelis who choose to be part of a democratic Palestine? That's from the audience. I'm sharing a plea from the audience.
Well, first of all, I don't expect anything. I think Palestinians are going to do what Palestinians are going to do. You should ask Palestinians that. I mean, you know, I think this is a pathway to peace that will improve the lives of everybody. But I can't speak for Palestinians and tell them what they're supposed to do or not supposed to do. My experience in speaking to Palestinians, and I'll give you a small example.
The question is from a Palestinian, by the way.
Yeah, well, then maybe I would be asking. And by the way, people's calling me courageous. Please don't. The courage is in Palestine. Nothing I do is courageous. I appreciate the compliment, but it's really but the courage is on the Palestinian side, and the willingness to live in peace with their occupiers under conditions of a post-Zionist free Palestine is a choice for every Palestinian is going to have to make on their own. It's not for me to tell anyone. But I remember being in Palestine many times during assaults on Gaza and others. And the conversation with Palestinians is always, well, why can't we just get over the violence, all hold hands and live here together in peace? And the conversation with Israelis is, how come we're not killing more? Across the board, every conversation, in a taxi cab, with family members, with people across the board. One side says this, one side says that. Again, it's not for me to tell Palestinians. I have no expectations. I think Palestinians have far exceeded any expectation in terms of their patience and willingness to engage in any effort possible to bring about peace. But you talk to any Palestinian kid in Palestine, or any Palestinian ages 4 to, 104, and they all say the same thing. We don't have a problem living together with Jews. We just can't live under this condition, under these horrific conditions of violence and apartheid. So, but again, this is a question not for me. It's a question for Palestinians.
Sure.
Thank you. So, thank you, Krista. We're finished with the questions. Right now, we are going to give opportunity for people who want to have a book autographed by Miko Peled to do that. So I think we have people in the lobby that would help you tell you how to buy the book. And then we're going to have a little bit of a line here. And one person at a time, they're going to come up to the table, and Miko's going to autograph the book for them. Miko's going to be here at least until 4 o'clock. So you can stick around if you want to mingle later, do your selfies, have your picture taken with him, time's permitting. That's all feasible. While you're here, wait. Thank you. Take a look at the lobby. We have some new artwork that came from Namir Qasim, tote bags and pillowcases. It'd be great if some of you buy some of those things. And anyway, you can support Palestinian artists also with some of the products. And we also have some books there. Get your books ready to be signed right here. There are only 30 books, so you better hurry up and get there. Krista, we're wrapping up.
Okay, thank you so much, Miko. It was a pleasure to have you at the museum today. Faisal, you're on mute.
Here.
We are wrapping up the Zoom session, so if we thank everybody who joined us on Zoom today, and we will place the a recording of the speech and the discussion on YouTube either tomorrow or the day after.
Sounds good. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone, for joining us.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
She's frozen. She's gone.
No, thank you.
Okay.
I heard you.
Thank you. Ma'asalama. Bye.
Goodbye.
I need to shut it down myself here. I don't know what's going on.